Hello and welcome to the third episode of on Netaji's Trail. In this series, we will be following the developments surrounding Netaji's mysterious disappearance from Taihoku and how it has developed, how the mystery has developed over the last 7 decades. And we will assess the various hypotheses about what happened to him and will analyze the evidence, look at all the evidences available and the assumptions made, and see whether we can reach a conclusion. In the previous episode, we saw that Netaji boarded the plane at Saigon. The destination of that plane, for Netaji at least, was Manchuria. And everybody knew it, only Habibur Rahman feigned ignorance. The flight plan of that plane was from Saigon to Turin, from Turin to Haito in South Formosa, and from Haito to Taihoku in North Formosa, from there to Dairen, and from Dairen to Tokyo. There were about 14 or 15 passengers in that plane. There was a pilot, the co-pilot, a navigator, a radio operator, 2 or 3 engineers. Apart from these 6 or 7 flight crew, 4 of the passengers were traveling to Tokyo. Lieutenant Colonel Tadeo Sakai, Lieutenant Colonel Shiro Nonogaki, Major Taro Kono, Captain Keikichi Arai. Lieutenant General Shidei was the only one going to Dairen. There was another passenger, Major Ihaho Takahashi, who was actually going to Jeju Islands in Korea. The flight took off from Saigon around 5 or 5:30 in the evening and reached Turin in about 2 hours. Since it was already evening, they decided to make a night halt instead of continue flying. After spending the night in Turin in a hotel, early next morning they started towards Haito. But during the flight to Haito, they got the message that the Russians had occupied Port Arthur. On receiving the message, the Japanese officers decided that they wouldn't make a stop in Haito but fly directly to Taihoku. Now, from this point onwards, various versions are available regarding what happened next. So, for the sake of convenience, to make it easy to understand, we will take Habibur Rahman's version as the baseline. Habibur Rahman himself gave various contradicting versions himself later on to different agencies whenever he was interrogated. But there is more or less, we will take the consistent parts and take that as the baseline. So the flight landed at Taihoku around 2 p.m. in the afternoon. While the plane was being refueled, the passengers were asked to step out and have a light lunch. During the flight from Turin to Taihoku, the plane was flying at around 14,000 feet, so Habib was feeling cold. So after he stepped out of the plane, he changed to a full-sleeved bush-shirt coat, breeches and top boots. Habib asked Netaji whether he was feeling cold, but Netaji said he didn't. Anyway, Habib took out Netaji's pullover and handed it over to him. Over the next half hour, they had a light lunch of sandwiches and bananas. Once all this was done, they emplaned and the flight took off around 2:35 p.m. It circled over the aerodrome a few times at a few hundred feet height and then turned north or northeast. But just after 5-6 minutes of flight, when the plane was still gaining height, Habib heard a deafening noise, as if a cannon shell had hit the starboard side of the plane. The plane started wobbling and nosedived with a wailing noise. Within a few seconds, it crashed on the ground. Its foreportion split and caught fire. Now, here it would help to check the sitting arrangement which Habib had drawn on paper and given to the Shanwas committee. According to Habib, as the plane crashed, the foreportion split off and caught fire. Netaji turned and looked towards Habib. Habib shouted, आगे से निकलिए, पीछे से रास्ता नहीं है. The entrance door, which was at the rear of the plane, had been blocked by the rolling, tumbling boxes and other items, other luggages. Therefore, Netaji rushed out through the fire, which was 2 to 3 feet long, followed by Habib. On stepping out of the plane, Habib saw Netaji about 10 yards ahead of him, standing with his clothes on fire. Habib rushed and tried to unfasten the belt of the bush shirt Netaji was wearing. It was not easy, it was very difficult as it was on fire, but he did it with a lot of effort. His trousers were, however, not so much on fire, and Habib didn't need to take them off. Habib noticed that Netaji was not wearing the pullover which he had given to him. He laid him down on the ground and noticed a deep cut on the left side of his head, about 4 inches, which was bleeding profusely. Netaji's face was scorched by the heat. His hair had caught fire and singed. Habib tried to stop the bleeding on Netaji's head with his handkerchief. Habib's own clothes hadn't caught fire, although he was wearing warm clothes. But because petrol from the overhead tank inside the plane had splashed onto Netaji, his clothes caught fire very quickly. Habib's both hands and the right side of his face were burnt. He had received a cut on his forehead, which was bleeding, and the right side of his right knee was also injured, and he was bleeding there. As both of them lay down on the ground, Netaji asked Habib, "Aapko zyada to nahi lagi?" And then he told Habib he felt he wouldn't survive. Habib replied, "Oh no, God will spare you. You will be all right, I'm sure." Netaji said, "No, I don't think so." And then he told Habib in Hindustani, "जब अपने मुल्क में वापस जाएं तो मुल्की भाइयों को बताना कि मैं आखिरी दम तक मुल्क की आज़ादी के लिए लड़ता रहा हूँ। वो जंगे आज़ादी को जारी रखें, हिंदुस्तान ज़रूर आज़ाद होगा, उसको कोई गुलाम नहीं रख सकता." They lay down on the ground for about 15-20 minutes when an ambulance and a lorry arrived with some Japanese nurses. Habib and Netaji were put up on the lorry. They lay on the floor of the lorry, which rushed to the nearest military hospital. As soon as they reached the hospital, the doctor attending there came to dress Habib first, as he was wearing the uniform. But Habib told him to attend Netaji first. As the doctor attended to Netaji, somebody else there stitched Habib's wounds. Netaji was conscious when he came in the lorry into the hospital, but was in acute pain. He was taken to the operation theatre, where he was given a white transfusion, probably camphor. The doctor told Habib that Netaji's injury was very deep and his heart was affected by the burns. When Netaji was brought back from the operation theatre, he was semi-conscious but didn't talk much. After about an hour, he fell into complete coma. Once or twice, Netaji asked for water. Once he asked for Abid Hassan, but then Habib told him that this is Habib, Hassan is not here. After that, Netaji asked for water again. Thereafter, he was completely unconscious. In the meantime, some officers from the army headquarters and a civilian interpreter called Juichi Nakamura arrived in the hospital. Both Netaji and Habib knew Nakamura from beforehand, because whenever they had to travel to Tokyo or to and from Tokyo, they had to pass through Taihoku, and they met Nakamura and they knew each other well. Even then, Habib could not recollect his name. According to Habib, Netaji expired at around 9 p.m., about 6 hours after the crash. Habib told Nakamura that he should inform the army headquarters and request them to allow Habib to take Netaji's body to Singapore, where everyone in the Azadin government and the INA were at that time. The next morning, that is on the 19th, Nakamura arrived again, and this time with a Japanese army officer. When Habib repeated his request to the officer, he assured that he would try to make it happen. By the afternoon, a coffin made of camphor wood had arrived from the army headquarters. Netaji's body was put in the coffin, wrapped in white cloth, with cotton padding, and the lid, the box, was nailed. It was closed by nailing. Habib was under the impression that this was being done so that the body can be transported conveniently. Habib again asked the interpreter Nakamura to place his request to the army headquarters for transporting Netaji's body to Singapore, and he also talked to the present army officers to help him get the permission. They all assured that that will be done and that can be done. Habib also asked Nakamura to find out about the luggage, what happened to the luggage that they were carrying. Nakamura returned in the afternoon to inform Habib that everything was completely burnt and only a few pieces of charred jewelry had been recovered, and they were kept in a box and preserved, stored in the army headquarters under a guard. But there was still no news about transportation of Netaji's body to Singapore. So Habib sent Nakamura again to the army headquarters, and in the evening he was informed by Nakamura that transporting the body wouldn't be possible. The coffin could not be put in a bomber plane. This was confirmed the next morning, the morning of the 20th August, by a staff officer from the headquarters who told Habib that they had measured the coffin and found out that such big a coffin will not fit into the bomber. Naturally, Habib asked them why they couldn't arrange for a bigger plane, but the Japanese informed him that a bigger plane was not available at that time. Thereafter, Habib tried to find out if it was possible to embalm Netaji's body, but the Japanese said that they did not have the requisite medicine in stock to do that. So it was decided on the 20th morning that the body would be cremated. In the same morning, that is the 20th morning, a photographer arrived and took a photograph of Habib sitting by the side of the coffin. The lid of the coffin was removed and Netaji's body was uncovered for taking photograph. But only the upper part of the body, not the lower part. The lower part was not uncovered. The head was still bandaged. The face was open, but it was swollen and disfigured. The upper part, the chest, was covered with white ointment. The signs of burns were visible. The hands were also burnt, but the arms were all right. One of his fingers was damaged. The abdomen was swollen. The photo of the body, excluding the face, the remaining photo of the remaining body was taken at Habib's request. It's important to remember here the description that Habib had given, that the upper part was uncovered and only the lower part was covered, and the photograph did not have the face. The chest was visible with burn marks, arms were all right, hands were burnt, the abdomen was swollen. The photograph was taken in this manner. This is what should have come in the photograph. Surprisingly, the photograph that we have shows this. Once this was over, Habib was informed that the arrangements for the cremation had been made. Soon the coffin was loaded into one lorry. The coffin was escorted by 2 lorries full of Japanese soldiers, an officer from the hospital, and other Japanese army officers in 4 cars. There were also a few civilians, according to Habib. Once they reached the crematorium, the body was taken out from the lorry and taken inside. The body of Netaji was taken out from the coffin, put on a stretcher kind of thing, and inserted inside the incinerator. The fire was burning underneath. The door of the incinerator was locked and the key was given to Habib. After this, Habib returned to the hospital. The next day, that is 21st morning, Habib went back to the crematorium with some Japanese officers and also Nakamura. He had the keys with him, so he opened the lock of the incinerator. As the incinerator was opened, Habib saw the burnt skeleton, Netaji's burnt skeleton, in its shape. They had a wooden urn for collecting the ashes. They collected some ashes from the head side, which was nearer to the door of the incinerator, and placed them in the urn. Habib noticed while collecting the ashes that there was a small piece of gold, which was from a filling of one of Netaji's tooth. Habib placed that in the urn. Once this was done, Habib and the others who had been to the crematorium, they came to a Japanese temple and deposited the urn there. Prayers were conducted. There were several Japanese priests, and this practice continued for several days. Habib returned to the hospital, and he was told that he would be carrying the ashes back to Tokyo once he had fully recovered. He was, however, moved along with 2 or 3 other patients to another military hospital. From that hospital, he was released on the 5th of September when he carried the ashes in that urn back to Tokyo. So this in nutshell is the story of the plane crash and Netaji's death in it. While all this was apparently going on in Taihoku, something very weird was happening back in Saigon. As you would remember that while boarding the plane from Saigon, Netaji had left behind 5 of his handpicked, chosen colleagues behind. Netaji agreed to board the plane from Saigon only on the condition that these 5 people would be put on a plane to reach him, to get together with him the next day. But what happened is absolutely inexplicable. The next day, that is 18th of August, there was no plane for these 5 people. Who were these 5 people? Major Abid Hassan, Colonel Pritam Singh, S.A. Iyer, Debnath Das and Colonel Gulzara Singh. So on 18th, when they inquired with the Hikarigakan people, they were told no plane was available. On the 19th, they were told the same thing. Finally, on the 20th, they were told that a plane is available, but all of them cannot travel together. They would be taken to Netaji in 2 separate planes. In one plane, S.A. Iyer would be traveling with some Japanese officers directly to Tokyo, and in another plane, the remaining 4 of them would be taken where? They were not told. They were just told that they would be taken to Netaji. So when these 4 boarded the plane, after a few hours, they found themselves in Hanoi. They were surprised that they were taken to Hanoi. But Hanoi had been in their own discussions. They themselves had been thinking that it would be easier to reach Manchuria from Hanoi. In Hanoi, Anand Mohan Sahai was there. So these 4 people went and stayed with him. Soon they were joined by Colonel A.C. Chatterjee, his assistant, and John Thivi. That's another story how they reached Hanoi. Colonel A.C. Chatterjee received a message on the 13th of August from Netaji to join him in Singapore. Chatterjee took a plane, but he was dropped in the midway and was informed that the plane won't go any further. Somehow he reached Singapore later in the day, on the same day when Netaji had left Singapore. But strangely, nobody in Singapore seems to have informed him that Netaji with his team had gone to Bangkok. Chatterjee had no idea where Netaji had gone. It was only on the 19th that Chatterjee was informed that Netaji had gone to Bangkok, and from Bangkok he had proceeded to Saigon. Chatterjee left for Saigon the next day, on the 20th. On reaching Saigon, he was informed that no one knew where Netaji had gone, but his 4 colleagues were in Hanoi and they were planning to join Netaji. So he should join them in Hanoi. Chatterjee left for Hanoi on the 22nd and joined his 4 colleagues with Thivi and his assistant Prannath. So if you look at this whole exercise, by 18th night, Isoda in Saigon had already received, apparently, whatever its truth, the news of the plane crash and Netaji's death. The team from Saigon who were waiting there, none of them were informed, although they were handpicked chosen team of Netaji. 4 of them were sent off to Saigon, to Hanoi, and 1 was sent off to Tokyo. On his way to Tokyo, IR was informed, and the remaining 4 were informed after Chatterjee reached. That is, after Tokyo had announced the news of the plane crash on radio. The big question therefore remains, why, despite having the news, the Japanese did not inform these people and misled them, send them away to a different place. These people waited in Hanoi, and finally, only towards the end of the year, they gave themselves up to the British. That's a big mystery, why they were separated like that, and why Iyer was selected and sent off to Tokyo.